Hey, good morning, all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's Tuesday, January 4th, and Tuesdays mean we talk politics around here. A lot to talk about, including how politics work in our country at the state level, including the federal level. We tend to care more about the federal level around here. But today we'll talk a bit about the control that Republicans have at the state level and a whole lot of other things. The difference between bad behavior and criminal behavior, because you can't talk about Republicans without talking about criminal behavior anymore. It just, the two just go together, and how things are going with the president and vice presidents, how things are going inside the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, all kinds of things on this fine Tuesday. Doug Pagitt here in Minneapolis, Robb Ryerse outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas, and Dan Dietrich, the producer, in the background, playing the songs outside of South Bend, Indiana. Hey, and January 4th, big birthday week around the Pagitt household. My daughter's birthday today, son's birthday yesterday. Since they were little kids, I've been taking them to the same restaurant on their birthday. The only day they get to eat out in our family is on their birthday, and back-to-back days over there. So today was yet another day at the original Pancake House on 70th Street.
Well, Doug, I might need to make a trip to Minneapolis because you know whose birthday is on Saturday.
Dan's?
No. Well, I mean, it might be, but.
Oh, your birthday.
My birthday. On Saturday.
Right. Yeah. Well, come on over and we'll take you out.
Yeah, I spent. I don't know if you remember this, but I spent a birthday in a abandoned school building in Des Moines, Iowa.
Yes, just a year ago, 2 years ago.
Eating pizza with,
that was a nice night.
And presidential candidate Mark Charles, and
Yeah, I did forget it was your birthday, but happy birthday 2 years ago, and lots changed since then. I was reflecting on that today, actually, just thinking back to when we did that forum, presidential forum in Iowa in January of 2020, and man, how the world has changed. One virus has gone out of the White House, and another virus is working through the population. A lot of things have changed in these 2 years that we've been after all this. Hey, let us know where you're coming from if you're watching on the stream. We love to say hello, and when your
birthday is.
Yeah, well, we'd love to wish you. We'll mark that down, put it in our calendars, and wish you a happy birthday. Or if you come to Minneapolis, I'll take you out to breakfast. How about that? That'd be a nice thing. That gets to be too much. I already complaining that it's taking two kids back to back, who are, by the way, are adults. Like these are 30 and 32-year-old adult people that we're going out. So it doesn't feel like a little kid birthday breakfast. Hey, Robb, lots happening here. I feel like the engine is starting now. Like it's. Here in Minnesota, we like to preheat our cars now with remote starts. It's sort of the equivalent to the 1970s. Go plug your car in overnight so the block heater doesn't allow your engine to freeze. You probably experienced some of that stuff growing up in the Midwest. So I'll often start my car ahead of time to get the car a little bit warmed up, and it makes that unusual sound, when it's 0 degrees and starting to rumble. That's what it feels like in the political front here, that the car has been sitting quietly, and now it's time to fire it up and start warming up. And we're entering into the political season, and a lot in front of us. So we're going to give a little commentary on what's going on, in the circumstances that we find ourselves in here today. But hey, I do want to note that I have a new setup in my office. I did a podcast yesterday in a live stream, a little special on the Beatles documentary Get Back.
So great.
Didn't mention my little setup, but I have a new little setup, and we played a little game of Where's Waldo here before we came on, about if people could notice the changes. If you just listen on audio, maybe you hear an audio difference because I switched microphones from a Rode to a Shure SM7B, which in the audiophile, podcasty, home studio world is a major shift. It's a shift in brand. It's a shift in tone. Literally, it's a shift in look.
Android to iPhone, right?
Yes.
Nike to Reebok, Coke to Pepsi.
Yes, Republican to Democrat. I don't know. You pick your comparison. It's a shift. So I'm getting used to it in my years and playing with lots of little things. So every January, some people make personal resolutions. I make audio and video resolutions and make changes in January. And I've sort of committed myself to only make changes around January.
Mm.
Or else I'll be fussing and noodling around like an old puttering man in my basement endlessly, which drives my wife crazy, right? Like, what are you doing down there? And I'm like, I'm plotting the protection of the
Just trying
democracy
to
from
save
my
democracy.
basement. Yeah, from my basement. I used to mock those people and laugh at those people, and then you realize, and then they were in the White House.
That's us.
So maybe that's a thing. All right, hey Rob, I thought we'd start here on the political front, just one step adjacent from politics, which is the criminal justice system. Partly because in just 2 short weeks, we're going to be gathering together in Washington, D.C. to raise awareness around the need to end the death penalty in this country, asking the President of the United States to sign any bill that comes from Congress that abolishes the death penalty, and then asking the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to demolish the death chamber that's in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is where the federal government executes the citizens of the United States when such things happen. And Trump administration executed a whole number of them, 13 of them, just in the last year of the Trump debacle. And we just think that whole thing should go away. The legality of the death penalty should go away. We should ban it in this country. And the apparatus that's used to execute people should be demolished. So some of us who hang around with the Death Penalty Action Group refer to this as the abolish and demolish campaign.
I like
abolish the death penalty in its legality and demolish the actual chamber where the federal government executes people when the federal government does so. And then to put in a garden or a place of tribute to the victims of murder in our country. That's often why someone ends up on death row. Not the only reason at the federal level. But that's what we're advocating for. So yeah, we have that going on in a couple of weeks. We'd love people to join us in Washington D.C. There's going to be some actions and some events and that sort of thing. But on a larger scope, so much has happened under the Trump administration that has caused people to want there to be criminal prosecution of the behavior of Donald Trump and his associates. Partly because so many people who are associated with the Trump campaign and the Trump administration were convicted of crimes. It's amazing, right? Normally, Republicans only have a small group of their cohorts that are convicted of crimes. The Ollie Norths, the Scooter Libbies, these guys. But Trump, as he's wont to do, just really extended that and had lots of people be prosecuted. And because Trump himself was, declared, I think they were referring to him when they were saying individual number one in the indictment with Michael Cohen, had a lot of us in because of Russia and because this news outlets that I watch, especially MSNBC, loves bringing on federal prosecutors who talk about things from a federal prosecution standpoint. There's a lot of conversation about the criminality and therefore the punishment of the president or his cohorts. But truth be told, most bad behavior, most treasonous behavior, most immoral behavior is not criminal, especially for politicians. And I don't like that. Who does? Of course not. But Don Winslow, not Dan Wilson, who I also know used to be a catcher for the baseball team in Seattle. But Don Winslow put up this great tweet here the other day. He said, I wish more people understood the difference between a civil case and a criminal case. Okay, fair enough. But I really like this one. The difference between horrible behavior and criminal behavior. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big one. And then the difference between direct evidence and hearsay, subpoena and indictment and conviction. I think that for the most part in our political system, we need to hold people accountable for horrible and immoral and wrong behavior, and not only let the criminal justice system, which is a very big and blunt apparatus to do this work. So many things that Trump did, so many things that the insurrectionists did, so many things that Roger Stone has done, all the things that Don Jr. has done may not be technically criminal behavior. They may be. But so many things they've done are not criminal behavior, but they should disqualify you from being someone who's paid attention to in our civic life.
Yeah. Doug, how do you, thinking about that, it immediately brings to mind, the idea of cancel culture. And there's been this big backlash in the past year about cancel culture. That it's actually become a pretty big Republican talking point now, that anytime someone's held accountable for something that they did or something that they said, anytime someone experiences consequences, they cry cancel culture. And I think that there is, I don't know, personally, I even hate the fact that I'm now talking about cancel culture because I'm just so sick of it. But it's become such a thing for us that there is, on the one hand, there is kind of the Twitter mob mentality where we're going to dox someone, we're going to out someone, we're going to make somebody's life miserable because we don't like what they did in some way. And then there's also kind of the consequences that happen either, at their job, or, some kind of repercussions, or, Marjorie Taylor Greene getting suspended from Twitter, and there's this cry about cancel culture. So I'm curious how you navigate that idea of like holding people accountable for their horrible behavior without falling into that kind of that digital vigilantism that all of us kind of just kind of feel
look, I
about.
think it's the thing we should be negotiating, navigating, right? This is something we should be talking about as a society, and to recognize that different arenas of our public and personal lives have different expectations.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. There's a set of rules that take place in some arenas of our lives. You could sort of imagine a sporting event where a coach is, well, I don't care for this, encouraged to yell at players. But you don't get to do that if you're the playground superintendent at Concord Elementary School up the street, right? Adults can't yell at children, even though coaches can yell at players. There are different expectations that are placed. And if you violate certain expectations in certain environments, it doesn't mean you should be removed as a person. I'm with you. And I heard someone say the other day about another entertainer. She's a musician. She's speaking of another entertainer who used some very negative language. She said, basically she was calling for this person to be not paid attention to any longer. And she said, how long are we going to allow a monster like this to function in the world? It seemed to me that, what she was referring to, maybe we hold the category of this person is a monster for things that are truly monstrous. So I do think we should be careful to not, take small trivial actions and to blow them up into you're having to walk on, shards of glass by being careful. And that's what a lot of people are afraid of. And then there are things that are just over the top, right? That
I don't know, encouraging an insurrection.
Yes. This sort of thing, full on, if you're Twitter, full on denial of the effects of COVID by someone who's using their platform to spread those ideas. They're a private company that says, we have rules about this and you violate the rules, and so you don't get to do it here, is not canceling someone in culture and society. But look, it's a difficult road to walk. I was happened to watch this, the Aaron Sorkin put out, I watch anything Aaron Sorkin puts out, just under the deep dream that someday I could maybe be in one, any show. So I just watch them longingly to be, I want to walk down hallways real fast and talk snappy to people and, do that kind of thing, sort of give that side look to somebody, and then come back. So I was watching the one about about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. I don't know if you've seen this, but one of the things they raise in that documentary was that Lucille Ball, along with a lot of other entertainers in the 1950s, were being accused by McCarthyism, the 1950s version, not and 60s version, not what will soon be the 2022 version of McCarthyism. He was a congressman who was putting together these "Are you a communist?" tribunals using the power of the federal government to see if entertainers, by dragging them in front of the a committee, would answer correctly about their own connection to communism back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. Well, that really was a problem in the United States, right? So we've had, and then you go back to the Salem witch trials. Like there have been times where we have organized society around punishing people for misbehavior. We totally need to have that in view, paying attention to it all the time and watching it. But when someone commits behavior that is so abhorrent that just because our laws don't identify it, we should say to that person, your political influence needs to be limited. Now, I draw a pretty stark line between not just throwing someone away and saying your political influence is something that's going to suffer. And that's where, for me, the distinction between cancel culture and political ramifications should be the thing that we're focusing on when we're talking about politicians or people that are trying to inject themselves into the civic life and engagement. But I think we should treat it very, very carefully. Oftentimes in law, judges, prosecutors, juries are trying to be careful to not use the law in ways that is overly punitive or damaging to someone.
Yeah. And there is that legal standard of guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which is, criminally speaking, is a very, very high standard. And I know we both have, to varying degrees, have been following the Elizabeth Holmes trial. She was the CEO of a company called Theranos, the youngest self-made woman billionaire in our country's history. Really an unbelievable story about the attempt to develop technology that could run blood tests instead of from a vial of blood, but merely from a drop of blood from a prick of a finger. Turned out that there was a lot of shenanigans going on. There were a lot of questionable technology, a lot of maybe mistruths about where this technology was deployed or not deployed, and the whole thing fell apart. Elizabeth Holmes has been on trial for wire fraud, for defrauding investors out of millions and millions and millions of dollars, as well as defrauding patients through the inaccurate testing. She was found guilty yesterday on 4 counts of fraud, not against patients but against investors, and not in every way that she was charged. I think she was charged with 9 counts, and
I think it was
she was
11,
found guilty.
but yeah,
11 counts, but she was found guilty on 4. And really interesting, the kind of the discussion of like, yeah, she probably did it, but can you prove that legally beyond a reasonable doubt? And so I think it's tremendously important that we kind of keep those things in mind. That oftentimes what happens is, that somebody has done this stuff, and either there is no law that applies, which I think we talked about a bit last week, and the deficiency is in the laws that we have. You maybe see that with the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, that like, man, the problem here is that he didn't break laws that should be on the books but aren't, because it's bad behavior that horrible behavior. And then if they did break a law, like, can you prove that beyond a reasonable doubt? And so, there's that threshold of criminal activity, and there is still a whole lot of horrible behavior that needs consequences, that needs some kind of response. that may or may not involve, that's probably not going to involve jail time.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes because we live in a legalistic society, generally speaking, and we live in a punitive society. So we believe, most of us, that we all are law-abiding citizens that follow the laws, and that's the highest standard of our obligation to one another. And then on occasion, someone doesn't, and when they don't follow the law, then they should be punished. Okay, so that's the typical way that Americans are encultured to think about these issues. That we're law abiding, there are laws, and you punish people who fail to uphold those laws. In reality, we live in a world where there's morality, and we know what's good and what's right and wrong, or we call the common good. And rather than assuming that everybody is always good and moral, we all recognize, that's a little squishy, and we're not really sure how that goes. And when someone violates our sense of goodness, rightness, and morality, we don't often call for authorities to come in. Society finds a way to respond to that. So we ask children not to lie. We ask adults not to cheat. We ask people to live up to their word, all of this kind of thing. Then when they don't, we then have to respond to that. And a lot of people have a redemption narrative and a repentance narrative in a way that someone comes back from that, and some people don't. But that's really different in having a morality that we know that not everybody lives up to, and we have a way of returning someone to behavior that feels like it's part of the common good. Those two worlds are competing with each other all the time, the law and order world and the redemption world of morality. We need to also say to our politicians, hey, if you just act so badly, the standard can't just be, was it criminal? And on the political talk shows, now they're having all the people from the 9/11 or from the January 6th commission on, and their question is over and over, well, did they break a law? Is there going to be a charge? Is someone going to be, prosecuted? Where are we on the prosecution side of this? Well, those are really different questions, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than, do you think this was right and wrong? And do you think we should be talking about that? Now, I think there's reasons why people don't want to talk about right and wrong, because a law-abiding society that has punitive responses to breaking laws is somehow easier than negotiating out morality, right? Yeah. Like you and I and lots of people around this world work in the sector of our society that talks about human flourishing and goodness and care, and religion and nonprofits and social groups tend to take care of that kind of stuff. It's really hard. It's really hard to find, your pathway forward on that. So our politics in 2022, I think, are going to need to be more about what's good and not good, what's right and wrong, and not what's legal or illegal. And I'll tell you, that is something that for a lot of progressive people, they don't like talking about rights and wrongs. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in these worlds, and that kind of, moral do-goodery doesn't always go over well, partly because we haven't developed the muscles or the criteria for how you think about how we live as a society. And I'm not saying we should be more moral. I'm saying we do respond to people through a moral code. It's just happening all the time. So we should probably get better at that. We need to be more moral. That's not what I'm... yes, of course we should, but that's not the argument that I'm making here. In our politics, need to be taken in a wider sense of social engagement rather than just legal or criminal behavior. Yeah. Like criminal behavior is it's the blunt instrument at the lowest possible level.
So here's an example of legal but horrible behavior. We see it in our state capitals all over the country, where we've got Republican leadership all across the country in state capitals. The majority of state capitals in the U.S. are run by Republicans. And in those chambers, some of the worst laws are being enacted. Some of the most egregious things that are taking place, the things that just kind of turn our stomach and make us worry about the future of the country,
Mm-hmm.
are happening in our state capitals. We think about the Texas abortion law. We think about Mississippi and Alabama. You think about resistance to mask mandates all over the country, anti-democratic voting laws that get enacted in Florida and Georgia and all sorts of different places. What all of these things are is they're completely legal, they're horrible,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they are an outworking of a very specific strategy that the Republican Party has put in place, where they decided, hey, we've got to. It essentially was kind of a two-pronged strategy. One is we've got to take the Supreme Court, and two, we've got to take state houses, and that's where
Yeah.
their focus has been, and what has resulted from that are some of the most oppressive laws that get enacted. Now, there's a really interesting opinion piece in the Washington Post today about how the Republican Party's control of states' legislatures, even in Democratic-leaning states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Virginia, is just having really disastrous effects on voting rights, democracy, mask mandates, reproductive justice, racial justice. All of these things are happening on the state level, and Democrats really need to pay attention to this, lest something like our worst fears come about.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about was that the purpose. We talked about the Green Bay sweep on our bonus episode of the Common Good podcast. For those of you that listened in, I don't even, was that last week? The other night?
I think it was last Thursday, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It was a Thursday night.
Thursday.
So in that, we talked about the Green Bay sweep, which was this plan that was devised by Steve Bannon and what's his name?
Navarro.
Yeah, Peter Navarro, to throw the 2020 election back to the states by shining a light on alleged voter discrepancies through the Senate and the House, particularly specific members of the Senate and the House, objecting to the certification of the electors from specific states in the Electoral College. So basically the plan was, we're going to object to these electors in what is typically a symbolic thing. That's going to require then a 2-hour debate about these things, because the media doesn't pay attention to us, and parenthetically, because these are all discredited,
that's right,
ideas, conspiracy theories,
because
the media doesn't pay attention to
on
how the 2020 election was stolen. Then this will produce a 24-hour period where we'll have the opportunity to convince the American public. There'll be so much pressure on Mike Pence that he won't certify the election, be thrown back to the states, where state legislatures will choose different electors. Now, the really scary thing is that in so many states, Trump Republicans are being elected to state legislatures, and when their guy doesn't win in 2024, will they send the correct electors to the Electoral College? Our whole system is based on state legislators acting in accordance with the Constitution, acting in accordance with the law, acting in accordance with the will of the people. But what we have seen over this past year, to this horrific sense, is that so many of these people who we trusted to, they're going to fight hard, they're going to do their best, but if they lose, they're going to do the right thing and concede. and, live to fight another day, as we talk about. What we've seen, though, is that these Republicans are not willing to do that. They're willing to throw all of that out for the sake of their own power. And if they
Yeah.
have control to do that in these state legislatures, I worry that we're on the way to really significant constitutional crises.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm just going to be Pollyanna, or Pollyanny, her little sister, about this for a minute, because I think the level of buy-in to we don't care what the people of our state said in an election, we're going to make the decision as a legislature. The number of people who would have to have that just shirk your responsibility, don't care what you've said you were here to do. The number of people who would have to go along with that, I just don't think exists. I mean, I know that there's going to be an election of a Trump supporter here and there and all the rest of this. But I think it's going to end up more like Georgia and more like, Pennsylvania and more like Michigan was in 2020 than it is that the goofballs that listen to Steve Bannon's podcast and are really willing to just burn it all down because there's nothing as important as having a Republican president. Like that, the people who believe that to give up everything else, even if the Republican president is not Donald Trump, just the idea that having a Republican president is the only thing that matters. I just think that universe of people is rather small. Now, do I think there's a lot of real stand-up
they're rather
folks in
small, but they're
there
getting elected to state legislatures. Like
No, I
that.
understand. I understand, but one or two. I mean, so most state legislatures have hundreds of people in them, and it takes a lot of those people to go along with it. Now, here's where my Pollyanny narrative here falls away. People tend to think someone else is going to fix the problem. When you talk to the
Yes.
Republican Congress people who supported the who rejected the electoral college views, who supported the objection to the 130 of them to the counting or to the certifying, they say, oh, no, we weren't saying Joe Biden didn't win. We were just saying there's questions and we just need to have another audit done and let people really give a good, hard, double, triple, quadruple check on this thing. The states will do the right thing. Like, we weren't saying if Trump lost and Biden won, we're not saying make Trump president. We're just saying there were a lot of questions still out there. Let's double check. So they abdicated their responsibility, believing that the state legislatures would be doing the right thing. Other people with nefarious plans in there, Peter Navarro and Bannon and Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner and all these guys, they were hoping that goodwill was then going to be manipulatable so that they could move, in some way to have Trump be reinstated as president. Some of them still believe that till this very day. So yes, it could be that so many people are like, well, someone's going to fix this. Someone's going to get this right. And then in the end, no one's there, right? There's, everyone I thought you had your hand on the safety rope, and no one had their hand on the safety rope. That's entirely possible. I will say that is radically different, though, than what some people are arguing. And I choose to not believe this to be true, that, oh no, there are people by the mass who identify as Republican and their state leaders who are just willing, in states where their population voted for a Democrat to be president, they are going to overturn that because they didn't like the outcome. That move, I don't know, that feels as, and it's not just up to, that's going to be challenged. Like, I don't know. I guess I believe that the safeguards and the general morality, and I want to call people up to that general morality and not just sort of let this kind of happen under the skirt, to go on. Because again, we're only talking about states where the people of the state would vote for a president of a party different than the majority of the state representatives' party affiliation in that state. It's the only place it matters, right? It doesn't matter in places
in
where,
Arkansas.
where it's where
Yeah.
it's the population votes along with the legislators'
Yeah. So
chosen party. So I think that's our built-in. Now, I will just simply say you're right, exactly, that the morality here, this isn't about criminality or not. Someone could make a legal argument, which is why as religious people, I've been, maybe you've been saying the same thing. I've been trying to say to religious people, stop being legalistic. Legalism in any religion, any politics, any human endeavor is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right. Have another calling rather than the legalism. As I played sports growing up, and there were people who cheated at sports all the time in ways that weren't really a violation of the rule. It was just bad sportsmanship,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just being a cheap hack about the whole thing. What we need to do is call people to, to be better.
Yes.
Or to be best. What was that? Was that Melania's thing? Was it be best? What was her thing? Be best?
Be best.
I never understood that. Was that be best? Like be your best? Was that what that was about?
It's a little bit like Build Back Better.
Oh, ACT, which we do need to get to. But yeah, yes. So anyway, I think this is instead of, and I guess I'm suggesting an alternative, instead of saying the reason we want to elect Democrats is because if we elect Republicans, they're going to do the worst possible thing. We should say we should elect Democrats because Republicans don't know how to control themselves as of yet, and we shouldn't be putting ourselves through these circumstances until they find some sort of moral pathway that they're going to follow. You can't pass enough legislative protections or law restrictions for people to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, this gets sound so 1980s. You can't legislate this kind of morality, but you can culturally call for it. Yes. Right. And this is what politicians, and we talk to them all the time, say to people like us. They're like, hey, get people to care about this stuff. And then it makes it possible for us to put laws or statutes or restrictions or limitations in place. But people have to go along with it first. And I think that's where we find ourselves. So I'm less dire about 2022, but I still think Republicans should not be. Republicans should not be allowed to drive the car.
So there's two pathways forward in terms of, maybe more than two, but there's at least two pathways forward in terms of hope that that these types of Republicans will not enact these things which are our worst fears, so that we can all live in your Pollyanny,
and Pollyannyville
dream. One is that we continue to elect, good moral Democrats, as we've talked about, and frankly, some good moral Republicans too. The other path, one of the other paths, is that Republican Party could just implode on itself. I grew up in really strict fundamentalism, I always, tell people, like, I grew up in a Baptist denomination up north where we weren't allowed to have anything to do with Southern Baptists because they were too liberal. So, like, just to kind of, put on the spectrum where we were, like, it was really strict fundamentalism. And one of the things that, if you look at church history in America, in the development of fundamentalism in the early 1900s, and then what happened with it, fundamentalism ultimately and necessarily begins to turn on itself. It begins to eat itself. There is this thing where you separate from the world, and you separate from liberals, and you separate from compromisers, and you separate from these, and eventually you continue to separate until you are left alone. And you are alone by yourself, because no one is good enough, pure enough, moral enough to be with you. And so, like, there is this fracturing that is built into the system. I think we're seeing a bit of that on the Republican side of things.
Hmm.
I think there is a fracturing that is built into the system of Trumpism. And, just the latest example of many of kind of these types of Republicans turning on themselves is, the latest skirmish between Dan Crenshaw and Marjorie Taylor Greene. A couple of Congress people, Dan Crenshaw from Texas, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia. And Dan Crenshaw really had some things to say about Marjorie Taylor Greene. So here's what's happened. Last week, Dan Crenshaw, called on Joe Biden to use FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to help with COVID-19 testing. To use the resources of the federal government to help aid hospitals, to fight the surge of Omicron. And Marjorie Taylor Greene replied that Dan Crenshaw needs to stop calling him a conservative. He's hurting our brand by taking the Omicron variant of the coronavirus seriously and wanting to marshal the resources of the federal government to fight it. Now, for anyone to say that Dan Crenshaw isn't a conservative is just,
oh my gosh, yes,
just ridiculous. And so he replies with, "Hey Marjorie, if suggesting we follow Trump policy instead of Biden mandates makes you mad, then you might be a Democrat or just an idiot." And then he called her out for going out for a few drinks instead of voting for the National Defense Authorization Act, which frankly, I would prefer that you go out for a few drinks than vote for the National Defense Authorization Act.
That's right.
But these two have turned on each other. These two who should be really clear allies, huge Trump supporters, huge supporters of this, all this stuff that makes us nervous about the future of democracy. And here they are turning on each other, calling each other Democrats, saying they're hurting the brand, saying, "Oh, you're not as conservative as I am." I feel like we're reliving this in what happened in church history. We're reliving it now in the political world where this fundamentalism is fracturing. Fingers crossed that happens.
Well, I think you're right. And look, and this happens in all political streams, right? There's infighting. We've chronicled that as it's happening inside the Democratic Party currently. Certainly happened a lot in the past. That's going to happen again. But I think you're really onto something here, because it's not only about one congressperson trying to bully or bump another congressperson to have their views. This apparently is happening across all the groups of the Trumpism collective. They are devouring one another as they seek more money and more dollars, and they're starting to turn on each other across the board. So it's even a deeper problem.
Yes.
It's one thing to have sort of nationally elected figureheads ping pong back and forth and maybe even think this is good for the party to sort of show that there's some range, right? I mean, this is all part of big tentism conversation. Mm-hmm. But this stuff, apparently, from people who pay attention to this, is happening with these little groups because it's just been a big grift from beginning till end. Yep. People that are spokespeople for Trumpism are there. I don't mean to make fun of reality television. It's just natural and everyone should. So I don't mean to do it. But the way that reality television people become famous simply for the fact that they were on television and then were famous, and they're the people who are running the Trump stuff. There was a great show, NPR show called Reveal from 2 nights ago that covered this, or maybe it was last night, that talked about sort of the back end on all these people, the guy who ran Pizzagate and all that. They're all just people who became famous because Trump retweeted them, and then they got caught up in the vortex, and now they're running conferences. But they're a disaster, and they're all going after the same money, and there's fraudulent things, and they're misusing money, and they're turning on each other. It's a mess. So that's the other thing that's happening. And again, I'm going to be, Pollyanny about this. I think that the seeds of the house that Trump and Trumpism is building is built on sinking sand, and it is not going to last. It didn't last. He's a single term, failed, twice impeached president who led an insurrection in his final days. It's about as bad as you get. No matter what you think about his political and policy achievements,
Yes.
the rest of that is just a disaster. So it's built on shifting sands. It's going to collapse. It is collapsing. Rather than fearing it through and I'm not saying we shouldn't pass we shouldn't pass voting rights reforms. Of course we should. Of course the federal government should have a say in the laws that are passed by states that influence federal elections. Of course they should. We shouldn't allow states to use a simple majority to change voting rights in your state and not allow the Senate to use a simple majority to prevent those, right? If simple majorities are enough, the Senate needs to stop acting as if the group of 100 people are, living in another universe and doing. So yes, changes need to happen. Of course. Yes. 100 times over. But fundamentally, you can have all the civil rights requirements that you need in voting. Ultimately, people have to act in good ways. And you get there by calling people not an idiot, but calling them to be more moral. Right? Like, this is the thing. I know it's hard for progressives and it's hard for Democrats, but people are starting to do it, to just say there's just a plain right and wrong here. And don't be on the side of wrong. Now, do we have to have, as you say, a system that doesn't just penalize people for mistakes, which a legalism system will do? It will declare someone a felon. You broke the law, you're a felon, therefore you're bad. As opposed to, you violated a norm, you broke a law, here's how you get back into society. I've got a bunch of friends that run companies that hire convicts. That's what they do. If you haven't been convicted of a crime, you don't get to work for this construction company. That's what they do, because they know how to work with them. They know how to make them transition into another part of life. They've developed an entire culture of it. This goes on all over the place. A religious leader in the Republican side named Chuck Colson was big at that, because back during the Nixon years, when Republicans were criminals, he came out of prison and started a thing called prison fellowship to work with prisoners when they get out of prison and while they're in prison. So there's a way to have people be failure of a moral calling and to still bring them back into the fold and into the flow.
Doug, can we just completely shift gears for a minute?
I would love to.
I saw a headline, and frankly, the news story didn't have many more details. I saw a headline today that just took my breath away. In the month of November, 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs.
I don't understand it. Yeah.
This is, we're in the midst of this thing that's been called the Great Resignation. And we're seeing, labor strife. We're seeing labor unrest all over the country. We're seeing people say, listen, this is not worth it. It's not worth it for me to be treated this way. It's not worth it for me to be paid this little. And so we have seen just a record number of people leaving their jobs. And I don't have a hot take on this. It just was like, wow. I mean, it was stunning. And the very little detail that was given is that workers particularly quit jobs in, can you guess the two industries?
Service industry, like being servers, and in the other one would be in religious work, pastors.
Well, no, as a pastor who quit in November, that hits home. Hospitality, so yes, service industry, and healthcare.
Healthcare.
And frankly, given
should have guessed that. Should totally.
Where we've been as a country, that those don't come as a big surprise. I don't know. This just was a news report like that. This feels worth noting and worth watching. Something's happening that could have long-term impact on our society here in terms of jobs. Not just, and what we're seeing is not layoffs. It's not downsizing from the company perspective, from the
Yeah,
corporate
it's
perspective.
workers.
It's workers saying,
Hmm.
"Nah, I'm not going to do this anymore."
Interesting. I wonder
Yeah,
how many of the, and obviously you're saying you don't know the details of, what they're looking at here on these numbers. Were these people who quit a job and then got another one, or did they leave the workforce? Did they say, I'm not working any longer? Or is this like, well, there's turbulence inside the system that people are, changing jobs?
yeah. I'm
Um,
scanning the article real quick. It does not indicate that people are changing jobs. This certainly feels like much more like people are leaving the workforce,
hmm.
including layoffs and discharges. The total number of separations, the number of total separations was 6.3 million.
That's a
Um,
that's a great phrase. The total number of separations. It's like in England when they fire
yes,
someone, they call it you were redundant. Like
yes,
we didn't need you anymore. We have two of
yeah,
you. Like I'm giving away these old Mevo cameras. Like I don't need those dirty things anymore. You're just redundant.
yeah,
The great separation. Let's not call it you leaving your job. Let's not say you're being fired. Let's just say you're that you're separating. We're just going to
yeah,
separate our roles from our life and your life. And well, look, yeah, what's happening now is what a lot of us thought would happen and some people feared. And I believe till this day, without any proof of it, that the Biden or the Obama administration feared this in 2008, 9, and 10, when there was a big push on healthcare. That if they'd
yeah,
removed healthcare from being related to your job and had it be totally independent and the costs to be way down, something more like what we use state funded Medicaid, Medicare, that if we had done that, so many people would have left their jobs because they've only stayed in their jobs because of insurance. And that would have increased because the deregulation and the way the Bush administration handled the economy in its final 2 years crashed the economy. So they couldn't go as far as should have gone because people would have left their jobs and it would have continued to crater the economy in 2008, 9, and 10. I think some of that's just literally been built up for a long time
mm,
and people have been waiting for the reason and the excuse. And maybe it's all the money that's come in that people were taking in. Maybe it's the child tax credit. Like I'd be very interested to know how many of these
yeah,
people are now like, I was working for that extra $150 or $250 a month. I think I can make this work and I can make some readjustments in my life and start a part-time job. And I know some people, I read a tweet of a famous politician today that said people shouldn't, no one should have to work more than one job. Um, I've always worked more than one job. I don't know
yeah.
why
Me
someone
too.
wants to take my job away from me. I don't understand this logic for the life of me. I don't think that's the point they're making, but a lot of people are trying to put together a couple of things, right? They
Mhm.
want to work on this thing as their primary and something else on the side. Whether that's good for society or not, I don't know. But I think there's a larger reshuffling going on here that
Yeah,
you're right about, and it's going to have cultural and therefore political expectations. Like all these state legislators that we've been worrying about, in almost all the cases, they have more than one job.
yep.
One is to be a state legislator as a part-time job, and then the other is whatever other job they have, whether it's a farmer, a school teacher, or a nurse, or a business
Lawyer.
owner, or a lawyer. They're working more than one job. People do that. people start a little side gig. They do a little thing. That we're really in a place where a single occupation is not the only thing that an increasing number of people
Yeah,
are doing. And look, we should do a whole economics conversation about this. Maybe we'll do it on this Friday about what are the implications of that. If you stop thinking about people in one industry
yeah.
versus people, doing a few things, and I don't just mean people running an Etsy shop. But could I complain about Etsy for just a minute?
No, you can't because we run a pretty successful Etsy shop out of my home here, just outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas. That
Well,
we are
you,
coming off of our our two best months in the history of our store. So yeah, go ahead and complain, Doug. Go ahead.
as a novice with Etsy,
Yeah,
me, a novice, I
yeah,
don't fully understand Etsy.
yeah.
I I share a weekly podcast with someone whose wife bought them a cute little on-air light box. I
Yeah.
really liked it. And I thought, I've got a new setup here. I'd like to have an on-air light box. I think that would be
Yeah.
cute. I'd also like a neon live sign over on the other side. So anyway, I went looking around for a vintage light box. It says on air.
You were looking
I
for
find
it
one.
in my background.
I,
Can I
I,
just interrupt you for a second?
sure.
Normally my on-air light box
Yeah.
is right here.
Right there. Yeah.
But right now it's in the doorway to the kitchen right there, communicating to my family
Ooh.
that I'm on air. So
It's not
if
just
you're
a prop
gonna
for you. It's
if you're gonna
usable.
get coffee or something in the kitchen, do it quietly.
Well,
So it's actually in use.
I was
this
only
month.
going to
So,
use mine for a prop in the background, just to sort of, just for a little wink, just a little wink and a nudge, right? So,
Yep.
so I went looking for one of these, and I find one on Etsy. I'm like, this is terrific. So I don't have to buy everything from Amazon or Target, local business, and I order it, and then 5 days later I get an email says, hey, your Etsy shipment or purchase has shipped. Great. Do you know where it's shipped from?
I'm gonna go
Poland.
India.
Poland.
Well,
Delivery date.
Doug.
Delivery date TBD. I'm never getting this thing. Here's my complaint of Etsy.
You could
not
complain about
Poland.
Etsy, or you could change your settings to only order from shops in the U.S.
There's
a
my
user
complaint.
error issue here.
Well, okay. This is my singular complaint about Etsy as a novice.
Yeah.
I have no idea that that's a thing I have to set. I have no idea that the default is buy this thing from Poland when there's no indication anywhere that it's shipping from Poland.
Yeah.
And might get here in August.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I mean, I literally had to just say to myself, okay, it's already shipped. There's no undo. Like, just think of this as a contribution to an artist in Poland. It has now moved from I get to have a kitschy little cute thing in my background to somebody in Poland's doing a little better today.
That's fantastic.
They had their best. They had their best year yet.
Yeah,
I'm hoping.
Hey, listen. Yesterday, I packed and shipped 14 packages, which my wife sells vintage stuff on Etsy, so it is a chore, quite frankly, to pack and ship.
Hey friend. Hey friend, pop an on-air light box on Etsy and get the could be delivered by Saturday. You can ship another 12 today. All right. Well, I don't know why someone doesn't start a law that says that Etsy has to, all right. Hey, anything else? Anything else we need to talk about?
No, I'm good.
Can we run through some comments? Dan, you good to run through some comments here? We like to keep people around. Frank gives us a YouTube link. So we guess we can click on that one later. And Norita Muno, she was on yesterday too. Fake Christians up in here. Norita, I just want to thank you for constantly watching the live stream and reminding us of our lack of Christian fortitude. She's a regular. Steve from Seattle, 63, about 4 decades in the faith. Can I say that in a lefty fellowship? So that's making a little point here. It's a little nudge that.
Hey, Steve. March 18th. Happy birthday, my friend. It's early,
March 18th.
but
we should write that down and have Steve on. Steve, if you're available. Carl says, sounds like me in the basement. Carl gives us a good solid you betcha. I think Carl comes up later. Yes, redemption's always possible. I like that, Carl. I'd love to know what you're thinking about that. And Carl comes back with state legislators, the scariest of all. And an autocracy appears to be around the corner. I'm going to hold that one off. I don't think and then a resounding yes. Carl, thanks for all your input.
Pretty sure that's Carol. But
Carol, not Carl.
Have I been saying Carl the whole time?
You have been saying Carl the whole time. Hey, can you order glasses on Etsy, Doug?
What's
The answer
in
is
a
yes.
name?
Yes, you can.
You can order glasses on Etsy?
Yeah.
Oh.
At least.
Oh, can you order a grammar book? VGC or Dodie Levinson. Loving this exchange. 2 exclamation points. That means a lot from you, Dodie. I know you're not just throwing those exclamation points around. That's good. Rod, am I saying that right? Keep fighting the fights, my friend. 2 fist bumps. He's not messing around either. I mean, when you double up on a exclamation point or a fist bump, it's a real thing. Irma, you reap what you sow. I think she's talking about what we were talking about, not so much reminding us of this truth. If you alienate people, people won't want to have anything to do with you. Doesn't mean redemption isn't possible. Yeah, that's true. Because it's not only in the Christian tradition, it tends to have an anti-redemption thing. There's a lot of people who just believe in a cold-hearted, cruel, transactional karma.
Mm-hmm.
I also need to, realize maybe not everything's predetermined by the choice that you made and all the rest of it. Dodie wants to know where, probably talking about where are these Republicans that are going to do the right thing, I'm guessing. Forest Nation, how the hell do I leave this group? 3 question marks and 2 exclamation points. I got to tell you, Forrest, I think you feel like I felt when I was inside of Etsy. I didn't know how to get out of it. I think if you stop clicking on the live stream, though, that's probably the start. But please don't. Stick around. And maybe, if it's not your real name, throw a real name in there. Jim, Mrs. Holmes, perfect example of the shallowness of American business. She was believed, in my opinion. She's an attractive woman, just like the quote, news on TV has attractive people delivering stories. Look, there's a whole package deal to Elizabeth Holmes for sure. And, she created a character that she played into.
Oh,
and everybody, this is the hard part for me about and this is the person we're going to come down. I'm not saying she didn't defraud people, but really, do you think Kissinger and Clinton and all the people that got behind her, you think they did their due diligence on this project? I don't know. I think if your big thing is, hey, we got defrauded out of our money, you should have been a little better with this whole thing seemed like cockamamie from the beginning, and
such a fascinating story.
Yeah. We could do a whole thing. We do podcasts now about documentaries. We could do a podcast about a documentary, a docucast. Roma makes the point about things being legal but not being moral. Slavery is one of those. And Jim says, I agree, both sides of the political party agenda over what's moral. It's true. Paying a starvation wage is legal. Roma's again saying hey, let's do good, let's do right. We already got Carol and her husband Carl. Jim, I believe that the Retrumplicans, I don't know if you can still use that because Chris Cuomo used that and then he got canceled. So it's my cancel culture joke. What's next? We can have a Kevin Spacey quote from a 1989 movie. Jim says, quite frankly, the Republicans are so gullible. I believe the Progressive Party can take over the Republican Party easy. Well, that's an interesting thought.
Jim is as a progressive who attempted that. It's more difficult than you might think.
That's a lot of work. It's like biking across the country. It takes a lot of work. I'm not sure it's a good idea. Jim says, quite frankly, the Republicans are so gullible. I already read that. Hey, and then Mike says, good morning. With the sunglasses, love it. Question, isn't it time that we really start holding all political figures to the minimum standard of telling the truth? That means not lying or spreading disinformation, not engaging in hate speech, cause for social discord. Elected officials should be held in the highest standards of honesty. And if they cross that line, they should lose their positions immediately. And political parties even have a mechanism for doing this, which is really the problem, that the political parties don't utilize that even, in lieu of the voters doing it or not. And then Steve says, many thanks, Shane. I feel better about my bed hair already. Steve, that's just fantastic. Maybe he meant Rob and wrote Shane. I've known that sometimes people will say or type the wrong name for a person. Dodie says, this is my favorite Common Good podcast of 2022. Apparently, Dodie did not listen to the Get Back, Talk Back documentary podcast yesterday because it would have been up in the running. And Carol says, I answer to anything. Thank you, Carl. I appreciate that.
We love you, Carol. Carl.
And Patsy McNutt Morgan, thumbs up, left Christian. I'm the only one of my siblings. Hang in there, proverbial Joseph. You're going to be okay. And if you don't know that reference, ask Doty. I promise you he'll give you some great insight on that. All right. Is that it?
That's it.
Rob, anything else? Producer Dan?
I gotta go pack some Etsy boxes.
I'm going to get in trouble for being late. I'm on Wesley Puck care today, and 17 minutes late. I'm going to go get in trouble. So I'm going to stall it out for one more minute to put off the pain. All right. Hey, tomorrow we're on with Robb Schenck, who's a faith leader, former right-wing extremist in his own category. It's going to be a great conversation. We'll see you at 10 a.m. on the Central Time Zone, if that's where you like to do this kind of thing. We good?
Great.
All right. Great sounding mics, you guys.
Bye, everyone.